On today's show, I am joined by Andrew Kelly of Peachtree Hoops and the Internet to talk about some Hawks team building exercises, what they should be doing big picture this summer, and more, and all of it's coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1989 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday. It's actually lunchtime on a Thursday here in early June. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, if you're a new customer, get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins at FanDuel. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make it your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to this podcast anywhere you find your podcast. That includes YouTube. We're also on Apple and Spotify and Overcast, all those places. And be sure to tell your friends about the show as well. And today, I'll be joined by Andrew Kelly, a former guest, a good friend of the podcast, talk about some team building stuff for the Hawks. It's actually going to be kind of a two-parter. We talked for about an hour, but the first part's happening right now. And there kind of is a clear line of delineation of the topics that we'll talk about. So this first part is dropping a little bit early, kind of an unscheduled early release, because I got questions about when the next podcast was going to come. And it's going to be right now on Thursday afternoon, talking about team building stuff when it comes to what the Hawks should be trying to do this summer overall, bringing back Caris LeVert perhaps, potentially like their Trae Young's future, trade stuff, etc. And then later on tonight, on Thursday into Friday, the plan is to post the rest of this conversation with free agency and the draft as the topics on that podcast. So anyway, here we go with Andrew Kelly. We'll dive right in right now to talk about, again, team building stuff for the Hawks and much more. I am joined now by a good friend of the podcast, someone I asked to come on, I don't know, once or twice a year. I don't want to overwork him in this space. Andrew Kelly, how are you, sir?
I'm good, man. You know I don't like to do too much work, so I appreciate it.
Listen, you're a man of mystery. People watching on YouTube, Andrew is a black box on YouTube right now. That's fine. Listen, this started as an audio podcast. If you want to watch me on YouTube, you can. But I value the content. I value Andrew's brain as someone who honestly, it's not that many people in the world that do both things that I'm about to say. Know the Hawks really well and also know the league really well and be able to talk coherently about like big picture themes of like team building and how to put things together, like what's valued in the league, all these things. I'm not trying to gas Andrew up on the podcast, but that's the goal of this conversation. And we'll probably get to some draft stuff at the end because I know we're talking about draft too. And a lot of my guests right now, as you might imagine, are draft focused because it's draft season. But I want to put that to the end and start kind of with the team building aspects. And look, it gets lost this time of year. Like we kind of know what it is to some degree. The Hawks haven't played basketball in like 6 or 7 weeks now. It's been a while, but they were a play-in team this year. The national jokes are basically the Hawks are living in the play-in, and that they've earned that reputation. I think that's a little bit easier to deal with right now if you're Atlanta because you are so young and you've got a young core that actually makes sense, all these things. But I'll start here. Like, what do you think of the Hawks and their standing right now, given what I just said, like given where they've been the last few years, the failed Murray trade, all that stuff? How are you feeling about the Hawks as a close observer of the team?
Well, first, I appreciate you gassing me up on the podcast for the intro. That's nice. I posted recently on Twitter. This is like the best I've felt big picture on them in a while. And I know it's like yet another year of being in the play-in, so that's disappointing to people. But I also think it's like a useful thought exercise to ask yourself, like, what would their record have been if Jalen Johnson played 70 games instead of 35 games? In that event, if you look at, the EPM estimated wins, they probably have at least another 3 to 4 wins. So they're at 44 wins if you get 70 games out of Jalen. And if you get that, maybe you tie for the 6th seed, maybe you win the 6th seed in that scenario. And if you get that, I think the discussion around the Hawks is very different than the discussion around the Hawks after their play-in exit. By that point, too, I mean, they had traded Hunter, they had traded Bogey, Capella, essentially like a lost season for him. So they were about as depleted as possible. And I think that does affect the offseason narratives about them. But overall, I'm feeling pretty good. And I think for the first time in a while, they've had what could be described as a youth movement. Obviously, Jalen Johnson has been a huge smash since his pick a few years ago. I know he's had some issues staying healthy the last couple years, and they extended him last season at a deal I think is very good. So that's someone you feel pretty good about going forward. Dyson Daniels, he's someone that I think really changes the perception of the Hawks just in general. Without that trade, I think people would be much lower on them than they are right now. But having him at age 22 going forward, I think is a huge piece. He still needs to make some improvements on his offense when you try to project how he could play as a postseason piece. But overall, I think the stock is pointing very up on him. Riza Shea, I mean, we talked about him last year on the pod. He had an impressive rookie season. I mean, it took him a little while to get going from an efficiency standpoint, but I really like his off-ball stuff. I think we both feel good about him as a defender. So they do have a good young core. Also a Konglu who broke out as a starter replacing Clint Capella. So they have some young talent. Kobe Buffkin still kind of hanging around. They have 2 picks in this draft. But overall, I like where they're at. You know, they have to kind of figure out what they want to do with trade this offseason. They need to actually make use of their exceptions that have long gone unused. But if they could get to where they have like a league average bench, you know, at least a league average bench, along with the aforementioned youth movement, Trey, I would feel pretty good about projecting them at least in the mid 40s. And that's something wins. And I think that that's something that would propel them out of the play-in. So for the most part, I really like where they stand. Like having big wings and potentially having your forward spots, the 3 and the 4, with Jalen and Ariza Shea filled for, you know, the next few seasons at least, I think is really important. And having that size that they bring, when you look at the playoffs, like the type of matchup problems they can pose on defense, I think is big. So overall, I do like where they stand despite being in the play-in yet again.
Yeah, I think we agree on really all of that. It's interesting, and I've done this too, where you don't want to overweight Jalen's injury stuff. And look, you can't ever assume perfect health. Like I try to make that point a lot. Like you can't just assume everyone's going to play 75 games. Like you have to have depth for a reason. I do think that not even playing every game. If Jalen had been playing most of the season, they would have won, like you said, a few more games. Probably not like 10 more games, but they would have won a handful more games. That would help the perception of things. Also, growth is not linear, but they do have a roster where the starting 5 basically on paper they're all very young, other than Trae Young, who's not old, like he's in the middle of his prime age wise. So there's some potential, improvement just from the aging curve, you would think, particularly on Ricochet. So yeah, there's a lot to like. I think that there already is a debate happening, and there will be one every time there's like even like a bad aggregation thing of a star trade. It starts like a war on Twitter about whether the Hawks should be making a big swing or whatever. And I'm going to ask you about that in a second, actually, to some degree. But it's even with just some relatively modest stuff, like you mentioned, using the exceptions, and that doesn't seem like a huge thing. But if they added a player that I would describe as a mid-level exception quality player, and then brought everybody else back, I think you project that team as it is, but with reasonable backup center play, all those things for like mid to high 40s and wins. And yeah, that's not going to blow anybody away, but that's a good basketball team where they haven't been a capital G good basketball team for a full season in 4 years. So that all matters. And it's kind of, it's nuanced, but and I get the boring factor of kind of bringing it back. But when you are this young, kind of running it back to some degree, again, running it back with moderate improvements on the bench is a lot more appealing than if you were some like tapped out team that you kind of knew what they were. Like when you have guys you could bank on, it would be reasonable, particularly with a new front office, all those things to kind of make not necessarily a total, not the same as this last year where you're not taking any steps forward, but maybe more of an evaluation, try to see what you have in certain guys, especially with the Trae factor and all those things. Like I think it is reasonable to kind of project some improvements without going crazy. I say all that, we agree, but put your fan hat on for a second, Andrew. This is not why you're here for the most part, but have you been entertaining any of the big swing trades? Like for instance, there was I won't even call it a rumor. It was like some interesting internet fodder, I suppose, today about, as we're talking about Kevin Durant. I wouldn't call that a rumor again, but like KD or Giannis or whatever, like, are you thinking about that stuff? Or if you're the Hawks, are you just kind of maybe not entertaining those things at the highest level?
Not particularly. I think when a guy like that becomes available, and I know he's 36, but when a guy like that becomes available, it's you at least want to do your due diligence and see like what it might take to get him. But again, I think like the theme of their season, and I know it was kind of undone by injuries at the end, was just that they had a successful youth movement. And I think it makes sense to continue to build around that when you have a number of 23 and under guys that are at least useful NBA players and some project to be more. I think you want to continue to enhance that rather than trying to kind of go all in and cut in line with a big trade like that. I'm not totally convinced that a deal where you trade for Kevin Durant and give up like a key young piece. I don't know that that makes you a contender. So the end result of that, I don't know if it's compelling enough for me to want to give up key young pieces. I think I would lean towards staying the course. And I know that like that could be frustrating for some listeners, just that it's been years of the play-in at this point. But I think you have to think about why they've been in the play-in and how they could get out. And I don't think that it takes a massive star trade where they give up draft capital. I mean, Kevin Durant at this point maybe doesn't even cost a ton, but it's still something I think I would err more on the side of caution and trust the young guys, trust the development model that they've had some success with versus trying to do an all-in type trade.
Today's show is sponsored by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are in full swing. Of course, the finals happening right now in OKC in Indiana. And every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments in the NBA, whether it's a game-winning shot or a player having a true breakout. This summer, there's never been a better time to get on the action than with FanDuel Sportsbook, and they make it easy there at FanDuel to stay in the game, both before tip-off and live when the game is going on. They have player props, performance trends, same-game parlays, and more. And fans have the really every single way possible to get back into the game, to play smart, and to win big. That's especially true during the playoffs, but it's also the case every day of the year at FanDuel. They have offerings across the sports betting space, from over-unders to spreads, of course. They have money lines and game props and futures, player props, live betting, and same-game parlays. And they also at FanDuel have every sport and league that you can think of. That's headlined by the NBA, of course, we talked about on this podcast, but they also have college sports. They have the NFL, MLB, NHL, UFC. They have golf, tennis, soccer, both foreign and domestic, boxing, and everything in between. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time right now to sign up on the service. Head to FanDuel.com right now to place your first $5 bet. If that bet wins, that first bet, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I think there is a distinction to draw. Like I've said this, I don't want to go down the KD rabbit hole too much here, but I think if you're trying to trade for Kevin Durant in particular, with his age, he'll be 37 when the season starts. Like you kind of need to be a contender. You kind of alluded to that. I agree with you, and I don't think that the Hawks just adding Kevin Durant makes them a contender. It would make them better. Kevin Durant's still really good, and if you want to, I won't say guarantee. If you want to be a 50-win team, if that was your goal in the short term and even in the medium term, that would probably do a lot to take you there. But I think given where he is age-wise, whatever team kind of has to think that they're a contender sooner rather than later. Because look, KD's kind of, I love him, honestly, personality-wise. But he's kind of prickly. He's going to want to win and all that stuff. And then there's Giannis, and my stance on Giannis is basically if Giannis is available, you have to make a call and you have to make an offer, but you don't have to trade every single thing to get him. There's some nuance there. I'm not saying you don't try, because he's not on a level where you do have to try, I feel like, even if you're not on the all-in train, and I'm not. Giannis is like, all right, you got to make the call. And the Hawks do have if the Hawks wanted to make a good offer for Giannis, they could. I don't know if they want to. I don't know if that would be entertaining to Giannis or to the Bucks. But that one, for me, you got to do it. But I also, again, I think it's going to cost so much more than people realize it's going to cost. Like, I think it would be, in fact, I'm confident the first offer from Milwaukee side would be, okay, we want Jalen Johnson, Zachary Richichet, and a lot more. And I don't think the Hawks are going to do that. So
yeah, like you said, they're quietly in a position where they are in a spot where they could get in for someone like that. Like they do have young guys on contracts that are appealing. I mean, I know Dyson still has to do his extension, but Jalen's deal is good. He's still got 3 more years of Richichet. Like they're really in a spot where they could cough up prospects to make that kind of a deal. I just don't know that, if you end up with a team with like Giannis and Trae, are you really that much different from Giannis and Dame and the Bucks? I mean, maybe. I mean, certainly you're younger, but Giannis is a little bit tricky to build around at the same time too. I mean, he's a top 20 player ever. Like you said, you have to do your due diligence and at least make a call for him. But I think generally speaking, they're going to be best off leaving these types of deals to other teams and sort of focus on what they have.
Yeah, we're in alignment there. Look, I don't want to have to spend 20 minutes on this, but I have to ask you as a team-building discussion about Trae Young, because that's one of the bigger decisions or storylines, however you want to put that, this summer around the Hawks, is what to do with Trae. And I've seen it framed as like keep Trae or trade Trae, and that's actually not the way I think about it, because I've really not heard much trade buzz at all. But it is, maybe that's part of this too. I'll let you take that wherever you want to go, but also the extension, and he's extension eligible. He can sign for 4 years and like $225 million. That's a lot of money. And I think Trae's good, but also Trae is a 6'1" guard. And at the end of that contract, even as a Trae defender, Trae enthusiast to some degree, I think it's probably safe to say he's not likely to be a full 35% max player at age 31. The history of guys at his size that are that is very short. It exists, but it's not a long list. So there's a bit of nuance here. I've kind of talked about, the middle ground of extending him on a less than max contract, which I think I'd be trying to do if I was the Hawks. But how are you viewing this? Because it's obviously a big decision. It's not going to get the same level of attention as the Giannis talks around the league or KD trades or whatever. But I think it's obviously starting point number one with the Hawks, because Trae, no matter what you think about him, everybody else on the team kind of looks better next to Trae because he's the number one, and they don't really have a number one if they don't have Trae.
Yeah, I'm with you. It doesn't seem like they're too likely to trade him. Like there hasn't really been any buzz around that. It seems more like, do they want to extend him and get some security team building wise for the future, or do they want to take it down to the wire and have him potentially opt out? So I think that's kind of what you're looking at here. I think that there's a lot of different paths to take with Trey. There's a lot of things you have to consider from an efficiency standpoint. He has ticked down. I think, relative to his stock 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I think he has gone down since then. He's still an incredible offensive floor raiser. I think that's probably his primary selling point in the NBA. Like the Hawks have had lineups where they haven't had much creation. They haven't had much shooting. Like these lineups should be dead, but he's still able to drag them to respectability. And I think that does matter. You and I discussed this like privately offline, but I think you can make a good case that he's really more valuable to the Hawks specifically than really any other team. Like when you look at the type of personnel they have, the need they have for half court creation. I mean, you still have Jalen who's working on his half court scoring. Regis Shay's still a long way away from that. Dyson improved on offense, but still, sporadic. I think that's something that they still really lean on Trey. Like it's long term, I think you'd like to wean off some of this reliance on him to potentially raise the ceiling on this team. So you're not just tied up on Trae Young. But I think that in the short term, they do really benefit from having him around. So from an extension standpoint, I think that's something that you approach, but you really have to have an idea that we're only going to do this if it makes sense for the Hawks. Like when it came up for his first extension, they had no hesitation giving him the max, and he got the Rose Rule, so that was a 30%. There was no discussion about that, and it made sense. They rewarded him for his play on the court. For this time, I think they have to kind of recognize that the perception of him has dropped a little. He's not a no-brainer. We're going to offer you the full max anymore. You have to actually think this out. So he's already had one nine-figure deal, and he's going to get another nine-figure deal. It's just ultimately, where do you settle on that? For me, I mean, like from an annual value standpoint, something in the 40 to like 45 at the high end type range. I think a 3-year deal can make a lot of sense. That could allow him to hit free agency one more time too before he gets, past 30. So I think that's something that you would want to look at. The Jalen Brunson deal, and I know he took less, was around that. So you do have a little bit of a framework to begin with. But something in that range, like in the low 40s, I think would make a lot of sense for an Trae extension. But it's not something where I think you want to bend over backwards to try to, you know, indulge him and max extracting the most that he can get from that.
Yeah, there's a middle ground, and it really comes down to like relationships and how the Hawks can approach it. Of course, there's the uncertainty in the front office, as you and I were talking on this podcast. We don't know who would run that negotiation. Right now, it's Ansi, but Tony's still there. Tony's been a Trae guy, from what I understand, dating back to the beginning. So I don't know what the line of the sand might be, but there probably should be one. Like I'm accused regularly of being too high on Trae, and that's fine. I don't think they should give Trae the max. Like that would be a mistake. I think. I think if there was a way to give a Trae a one more year at the max, like yeah, I think he'll probably be worth the max for another year. That's the one he has now, but that's not the way extensions work. So there is a middle ground. Like you mentioned, that $40 million range. I would be in favor of that kind of deal. 3 for 140 or whatever that would be. The Jalen Brunson deal is 4 for like 155. Maybe that's a deal that you can offer him. Maybe you sweeten it with a player option at the end. You got to give Trae some flexibility. I have used that parallel too. I will always try to state when I do that Brunson was not coming off a full max contract. Brunson was also very clearly taking less a year early to help the team. And I think, look, Trae might be, I don't know. I've not asked Trae this personally. I would love to know if he would be even remotely interested in doing that. Like, I think that he's happier in Atlanta from what I understand behind the scenes. Like last season, he was pretty bought in, and I think that was impressive, and he took on more of a leadership role, and all those things matter. He's said all the right things this summer, even like his social media stuff. I don't want to overweight that, but he seems to be bought in Atlanta. I think he's in, but that's different than taking a lot less money. So there's this interesting
From a
conversation you
career
have to have. So
standpoint,
we don't know.
just from a basketball career standpoint, I mean, I think he's best in Atlanta. Like they have
Agreed.
a good young cast of players to surround him with. Like the outlook for the Hawks in the near term has been the best it's been in a while, I think, post DeJounte Murray trade. Like they've gotten back some draft capital. They have, again, a good 23 and under mix of players. It makes sense for him to want to be in Atlanta versus uncertainty on another team. I don't think there's going to be a contender that is all in on trying to, acquire him. So I think just from an immediate playoff perspective, I think it makes sense to stay in Atlanta, and they could probably sell him potentially on leaving a little bit on the table, because you still have to have Dyson's contract. He'll extend possibly this summer. You
Right.
have Jalen's deal taking effect. So there's other considerations they have to look at when they think about how do we want to set this team up for the next few seasons. But if he's willing to give up a little bit of value to stay with the Hawks and be on a good team, I think that's something that he should heavily consider.
I think Trae is really aware of how those things could come together too. Like I think that it's a much easier sell, to your point about him being more bought in now. Like when you have a guy in Zach that he really likes, a guy that Dyson that you really likes, and Jalen, and especially with Dyson coming up, you could say, look, Trae, we probably can't pay Dyson. Maybe not probably. It would be harder to pay Dyson if we pay you the full max and have that little bit of a discussion. It's not going to be a parallel exactly like that, but there's a little bit of a selling point there. And look, I am the first to say, people that are normal like me, like I don't have billions of dollars. It's different thought process. But if I'm Trae Young, somewhere in the back of my head, I might be thinking, hey, it'd be pretty cool to be like not like necessarily a lifer. Like he might leave at some point in the organization, but like to cement like jersey in the rafters. This is my organization. But face of the franchise since Neek, all those things. Like there is some value to that intrinsically in a big city where people like you. And then look, the cruel reality is, and we don't talk about this a lot, but the Hawks, even if they decided they wanted to trade Trae right now, I don't know if they're going to get some great offer. Like
it's not going to be a lot.
Yeah, they would get some value for him. Like you don't have to give him away, but like he's not going to get the kind of offer. Throw Giannis out there, but like he's not going to get the Mikal Bridges offer. Like that's not coming. Like you're not going to get 4 first-round picks for Trae Young. I don't think this summer. So on the team side, it makes sense. They need Trae. Like I think all the supporting guys kind of need Trae to make it all work. And yeah, ideally, you mentioned this quickly earlier. You're right. In the perfect world of a team building construction of a title contender, you need someone to be as good or better than Trae next to him. He probably shouldn't be your best player on an absolute top tier team. But also the guys you have in the building right now, none of whom I don't think project to be a number one offensive creator on a title winning team. Maybe Jalen gets there. Maybe Zach blows us all away. But like, if you're playing the percentages, I think Trae being the best offensive player of the 5 guys is likely for a few more years. So it's interesting. Nuance all over the place.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you with that. And I also think that one thing that's hurt him too is I think just the league-wide perception of small guards has like never been worse than it is right now. I mean, I know that's kind of funny too because Jalen Brunson just had a successful postseason, but league-wide, I just think the teams are just not really in on these 6'2" and under players. I think that's something that does affect his reputation around the league, just simply being a smaller guy. And I think it's easier to sell him on potentially leaving a little bit on the table with where they stand now than where they stood a year ago. Like I think he could see the vision with this team. I think he seems to be bought into Quinn Snyder and what he wants to do. And also, like you mentioned, I mean, he's already had a max deal. This next deal is going to take him north of $300 million in career earnings. So at the end of the day, we're talking about generational wealth. So it's just, how much is he willing potentially to leave on the table? I'm somewhat optimistic about extension negotiations. I mean, I know Fields has departed, but overall, this front office has done a pretty good job with extensions in recent years. So I'm optimistic as it regards Trae.
I want to pivot a little bit away from that. Before we get to some draft stuff, I do want to ask you about the other than extensions, the biggest decision they have internally this summer is Caris LeVert. I know they have backup center questions, and Clint and Larry are free agents, but those guys are respectfully, everybody knows I love Clint, not a priority return. They need Caris LeVert. I'm not saying that it has to be Caris LeVert or that you pay him at all costs, but if they lose him, they have to replace him with someone comparable to him because they just don't have that kind of third wing, third guard, how you want to put that, like sixth man type of guy who can really create offense. And Caris is a flawed player. He's not a perfect player, but he's a good player who's going to have a market. And by all accounts that I've heard, they want to keep him and he wants to stay. That doesn't mean that's going to happen, but I wonder what you think about like price point and whether you would personally like to pay Caris LeVert, because there's age challenges there too. He's not always been the most durable guy in the world. Like, what do you make of Caris LeVert? Because he's not a huge name, but it's a big decision they have to make too.
He's a very solid role player, has been for a few years. They need a little bit more creation and scoring after they traded Hunter. Like having a bench option like LeVert, I think is important. So for me, I think it's hard to find a way where you let LeVert walk and end up being better as a bench. As a result of that, even if you use the MLE, even if you draft pretty well, I think it still makes sense to try to bring him back on the right deal. For me, I think you're looking for something a little bit shorter. I mean, he's 30, something like a 2-year deal would make sense for me. I was trying to find some comps and nothing really jumped out to me, but I was thinking like annual basis value, he's got to be, 12 to 15 million, somewhere close to full MOE. Like if you could get him for 2 years, mid 20s, that would be, I think, something that makes a lot of sense. Maybe like 2 for 26, something like that to bring him back would make sense for me. And hopefully you're using that in tandem with the MLE. So you're going over to bring him back and end up with the most optimal bench construction. But he's not someone I would let walk unless his market ends up being unexpectedly hot and you have to use reason.
Yeah, part of the reason I am optimistic that they will bring him back, and I'm not guaranteeing it, but I think it's going to happen, is that there isn't that much cap space around the league. And you can do signing trades, all that stuff, but I don't think that Caris LeVert getting the mid-level, like I think it would be a years, not dollars thing. If somebody offered him the full 4-year mid-level, that's a lot. And if the Hawks don't want to match that, I would totally understand. But short of that, I don't really see where a offer that's better than what the Hawks can offer him is going to be out there for Caris. Maybe it's a fight between 2 years and 3 years. Maybe it's between 13 million and 15 million a year. Like I kind of get that. I did a poll of people around the league, like very informally, probably 2 months ago. And it was like, yeah, $15-16 million a year in a vacuum, but this is not a vacuum. Life's not a vacuum. Yeah, I think maybe 2 for 30, or maybe if it's 3 years, it's maybe less annual value. Like, 3 for, I don't know, 3 for 39, something like that, 3 for 40. I don't know. There's a middle ground there. He's worth that money. You hope he doesn't age out of it by the end. And that's why you would be worried about the third year. But I think he's not that old. And I think, by the way, if it is that, maybe you're trying to do it in a non-rising fashion. Like if you can kind of not front load it necessarily, but have it maybe be flat like they did with Jalen's deal, or go down a little bit. Because look, he's 30 now. He'll be 31 beginning of the season. I think he'd probably still be a pretty good player at 33, but you don't want to bank on that. And if you're paying him $12 million in year 3, that's like ninth man money by then, and you're probably fine.
Do you think like Terrence Mann's contract like he got 4 years, but do you think a 3-year deal close to that figure? I mean, he's got to at least get more than that. I would think he's a better player than Terrence Mann. So
well,
I was thinking maybe something like that.
The unfortunate thing about that is Terrence Mann's contract is not exactly viewed as a positive in the league right now.
But if you're his agent, you're still looking at that and saying like, I'm at least going to get this kind of annual figure.
Yeah, the problem is, I shouldn't say problem. The framing is, you're right. There are comparisons you can make if you're Caris' agent of guys that he is better than, that make 15, 16, 17 million dollars a year in the league. Those guys are available. If you're the Hawks, you have to make the case to the agent and say, look, that offer is not available to you anywhere. Like, I don't think there's one team right now that has cap space. It's Brooklyn. They're not going to be prioritizing Caris LeVert. There are teams that can get there if they wanted to clear some space, Detroit or whatever. But like, I don't see a team doing those machinations to offer Caris LeVert 17 million a year. Like, I don't really see that. So you're kind of battling against MLE teams. And again, that might be out there. If it's 4 for 64, which is the mid-level exception basically right now, that's probably too rich for what I want to pay Caris LeVert.
I don't think you go quite that far. Yeah. I think if you're going to do like 3 years, if you're doing like 3 years, I think more like 13, 14, 15, something like that, maybe. I don't think you want to go quite to that point on him.
And maybe you could do one of those creative. We move off this too. But maybe you do one of those creative offers where you give him, it's a 2-year deal, but you give him 17 million in year 1, and you have it go down. The most it can go down like, something like that. One of those, like, pay him a little bit more now, so because you got Dice kicking in next year. There's some wiggle room here, I would say.
And I
But
think his improved defense is part of it too. Like he
yeah,
really has improved as a defender the last couple of years. So he's not just like a bench scorer, bench
for
creator.
sure.
Like he actually does bring other things to the table. I mean, he's a balding guy. He's a good vet.
No, he's a very good player. Not someone you want to go crazy with. And there are the Hawks are not really in the apron concern range, but big picture in the league, you don't want to, with the restrictions that are in place now, where you can get burned is overpaying these kind of guys. But I think there's some natural restrictions in place, some natural barriers for the Hawks not to do that if they just kind of work through the market, use the comparisons. And I think also, again, I tend to, from what I hear, I think LeVert would like to stay. And that doesn't mean he's going to stay. But if there's benefit of the doubt there, where like he doesn't have to be, the Hawks may not have to be the absolute best offer for him. If it's close, he might just choose to stay because he likes it and he likes Quinn and all those things. You still got to be competitive. Like, it's not gonna be a huge discount for a guy who's 30 years old. Like, he's gonna want to make some more money in his career. But if it's like you versus the same offer somewhere else, he probably stays. From what I hear.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna let him go, you have to have like an actual alternative. It's not gonna be like, let's let him walk and just trust that Kobe Buffkin's gonna fill that role or something like that.
No.
You have to have, either another trade candidate or someone with the MOE that makes up for letting him go. Otherwise, I think you really are lowering the floor of the bench.
And of the team. I mean, we led with this in the beginning of this conversation, but I mean, if they don't have, if you just took Caris LeVert off the team, I'm not saying that's going to ruin your team, but it does make you worse, like considerably worse. Like, I think he is their sixth man going into next season. Like, pretty clearly, their best reserve is Caris LeVert, and that matters. Like, it does matter. There were lots of games, and I know people hated it, including me sometimes, but like, he was closing over Ricochet a lot last year, and that probably won't happen moving forward a lot as Ricochet gets older. But like, he was a valuable player on this last year's team. If they didn't have him, obviously the Hunter trade is a different discussion we don't have to have right now, but they do need someone like him if it's not going to be Caris LeVert. All right, that is it for this edition of the Locked On Hawks podcast. Please stay tuned for part 2 of this 2-part conversation that's going to be dropping on Thursday evening into Friday morning with more from Andrew. Also, be sure to subscribe to the show, generally speaking. Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're also on YouTube. Follow the show on X/Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. Follow my Blue Sky at BT Rowland. Also my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. All right, everybody, again, stay tuned for the next show coming up later tonight, and we'll see you all next time.